Good morning, I'm Rowena Crosby.
And I'm Deborah Renner, and we're your co-hosts for this show. Thank you for joining us for the next 17 minutes for your Invisible Toolbox, the show that looks at the tools that are essential for working effectively with others.
Have you ever wondered why some people seem to be so comfortable with the familiar and they're not anxious to contemplate anything foreign or culturally different?
It's so true. And have you noticed that other people are the first to sign up to host an international visitor or to help out a culturally different colleague and walk through things with them?
And along those lines, many people are very conscious of how they are perceived by others from different cultures.
And yet others will complain about places and people that are different than themselves.
And so of those examples, some may sound negative, some may sound positive, but there's one thing that's true of all of them. They really illustrate the stages we go through when we're building some cultural competence.
Yes, and today we're going to take off any opinion hats we have as to negative or positive and just take an objective look at the stages we go through to develop intercultural sensitivity.
And most of us like to think that we're accepting of others, and we may not be. So it involves, as so many things that we talk about on this show, becoming self-aware and reflecting on ourselves. And today we're going to talk about what that looks like when we're interacting with someone culturally different.
Yes, and Dr. Milton Bennett developed a developmental model of intercultural sensitivity, which tells us that developing intercultural sensitivity is a process.
And it's an interesting process. It's one we're going to look at today, and we're going to examine one of the tools in your Invisible Toolbox to help us with that cultural competence.
And we're going to have a development challenge that'll help us become more culturally sensitive and aware. And we're thrilled we have an interview with Dr. Harwant Kush. Dr. Kush is a living example of a culturally sensitive global professional, and we're just thrilled she can be here with us today.
We can't wait till the interview segment. She's just going to bring so much wisdom to us. Well, sensitivity around difference is a really important component of being emotionally intelligent. If you're following along in the book, we're in chapter 49, and the title of that chapter is The Fast Track. So let's get started.
Well, cultural sensitivity has never been more important. If we think about it, if you're employing foreign workers, if you even are just dealing with domestic diversity or trying to get into new markets, we can't afford to be ignorant.
We can't, and we can offend someone without even realizing that we're doing that. If you even think about just a one-on-one, if we're not sensitive to somebody's dietary preferences or restrictions based on culture, we can easily offend, and that can communicate a lack of respect, even though we don't want to do that.
Yes. Selling products in different markets, we are at risk of offending. There was an article by Dr. Michael Caput. It's titled The Importance of Cultural Sensitivity in Business, and he cites a film company that put out a film called Hollywood Buddha and then tried to market this film to people in Malaysia and Sri Lanka. Obviously, that didn't go over well and was an insult to the symbolism that they revere.
And just a little conscious thought into it could have avoided that. And similarly, in the article, he talks about some of the marketing language that we use. I love the example he provides of a product, an alcoholic beverage called Irish Mist, that wasn't well received in Germany because in that language, mist translates to manure.
So it wasn't the Irish German, it was actually the translation.
Exactly.
You know, and there's probably no more important place to be culturally sensitive than within the walls of our own organizations. Just being able to acknowledge and observe other people's traditions, the things that are important to them, or things about language. All of that is going to be good for morale and be equitable to all the employees.
And as you said, it really requires that we become aware. And where we are with respect to our cultural lens can actually be plotted from ethnocentric to ethno-relative. So what are those things, and how can we possibly know where we fall on that continuum?
Well, let's talk about those in our development challenge of the week. This is the segment of the program where we challenge you and we challenge ourselves to do something new, to act out of habit.
And we like to think that we're empathetic, that we're culturally sensitive. We may not be.
Well, how many times have you heard someone say, "Oh, I don't like working with those people," or "people from that country are just fill in the blank.
Exactly, and we often find ourselves saying those things. And so generalizations can be our best first guess, but when we hold rigid stereotypes, we're demonstrating something that's called ethnocentric. So ethnocentrism is when we're viewing the world through our own cultural lens.
Yeah, and Dr. Milton Bennett discovered this through his developmental model. Ethnocentrism shows up in different ways. It could be that the only way we can observe culture through our own lens when we see difference is to acknowledge the things that are so basic, such as maybe how someone's dressed or the color of skin. Or when faced with another set of cultural values, we interpret it through our own value system, and so we polarize, or we kind of come up with an us-them mentality. Or we might actually see the similarities between ourselves and someone different, but we again see it through our own cultural lens, and so those similarities, we sometimes assume things about someone that's different, that it's more similar to us than not, and we might be wrong. But as we develop through our lives and through our experiences and through our self-awareness, we actually can move into ethno-relativism. And that's where we do identify the essential differences, and we can acknowledge them, we can accept them. We don't have to accept them as our own, but we don't analyze another culture's values or ways of being through our own lens. That allows us to eventually adapt our thinking cognitively and adapt our behavior in different cultural contexts so that we can always be appropriate.
Absolutely. And so our goal really needs to be to move from ethnocentric to ethno-relative. And to do that, we have to be conscious and challenge how we're thinking about different people or different groups of people and which lens we look at that through.
Yes.
So it's time to look at our invisible tool of the week. Our invisible tool this week is found in chapter 49, and it is to begin to understand our own worldview.
Cultural sensitivity demands that we have a more inclusive worldview. And like anything else, like anything in leadership, it starts with an inclusive worldview, starts with an examination, not of the other person, but of ourselves.
So employing the development challenge that we just walked through is a really good first step. So let's recap.
Do you engage with others that are culturally different from you so that you can begin to learn?
Are you conscious of your thoughts about people who are different?
And can you create a new awareness of those thoughts and actions when it comes to cultural difference?
And when we can employ this awareness, we can make conscious choices, which is so much more productive than the unconscious reactions that often guide our behaviors and can be offensive or insensitive.
So let's take a look at a couple social media posts that will help us develop a more inclusive worldview.
Those of you that follow us on Tero's social media platforms already know that we post useful links several times every day to interpersonal skills topics. We're going to feature two of those today. The first comes to us from the Society of Human Resource Managers, or SHRM. In 2016, they published a robust report on culture, and it is titled Cultural Intelligence, the Essential Intelligence for the 21st Century. And the report really makes the business case for why this is going to be important for all of us as business professionals to become skilled in this. You will find a link to that on all Tero social media platforms today.
And our second post is an article by Marshall Goldsmith, and it was published in the Harvard Business Review. It has a really catchy title. The title is Learn to Embrace the Tension of Diversity, and diversity does cause us tension as we're working through those stages from ethnocentrism to ethno-relativism. And the article gives some great tips on how you can have your organization be more culturally sensitive. It's going to be on all Tero platforms on Thursday.
Well, we're excited because we're moving into this week's interview. And this week we get to welcome Dr. Harwant Kush to our table for the discussion.
Yes, welcome.
Good morning, Harwant. Thank you so much for joining us. We are delighted to have you as our guest today.
Glad you're
So
here.
as Harwant scoots into the table here a little bit closer so we can be in our shot. Harwant is from Indian origins, but she was born in Africa. She lived there for many years. She did live in India for many years, where she studied and worked. She acquired her PhD while she was living and working in the Philippines, and now she calls Davis, California, home. So she brings a wealth of cultural understanding. At Tero, we feel so fortunate to have welcomed her to our team back in 2011 as a research consultant. So thank you, Harwant, for joining us today for the interview.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
We're thrilled
Thank you.
you're here. Can you share with our viewers a little bit more about yourself, Harwant?
Well, I was, like Ro mentioned, grew up in Africa, then moved to India. From India to move to California. From California to the Philippines. So each time I have to move, I have to learn the different culture, learn to adapt and find their ways of doing the things. In that process, I think I really grew up a lot by absorbing different cultures. So my worldview has changed tremendously, and I am so thankful for everything.
That's wonderful.
That is. Can you think of one particular example where you had to adapt or you found yourself adapting to the host country system?
That was when we first came to US. It was so different, everything. Even the homes look different, the buildings are different, road signs are different. One side of the road will have one name and the other side of the road will have a different name. And their sense of direction wasn't there. You have to learn to drive, and the day-to-day activities were so different. So first it was really, you become so defensive that why they are not like us, why the food is so different. So it was really difficult in the beginning, but slowly you get used to and you really learn to appreciate how they do the things, what actions they are taking, and you learn to adapt and assimilate that part.
That's such a good description of that movement from ethnocentrism to ethno-relativism.
Yes.
And anyone
Yes.
who's traveled or worked internationally has had some of those same experiences, even if they haven't lived in another country.
Yes. What advice do you have for our viewers on how to figure out those cultural nuances if they are existing in a different culture?
I would say all the cultures are really great. That's part of who they are. Do not go with your views of that we are really great based on ethnocentrism. And try to learn how they do the things, why they do the things, what's best in that culture. You don't need to give up your own culture completely or even part of it, but try to absorb. Do not put the barriers around you. You turn to assimilate so you can learn to adapt and evolve in the process. That's where the progress comes. Not by putting the barriers.
The barriers get in the way, don't they?
Get in the way, yes.
What about language? It can sometimes be a barrier for people if they don't know the language. Have you ever been in a situation where you were living in a culture where the language was not yours?
Yes, there have been. First, when I moved over here, English was difficult for me. The accent is so different. We were used to a different English accent. And the pronunciation was different. So you learn to adapt. When we moved to Philippines, they have their own national language. In India, we have so many languages over there. It's always a learning process. But you pick up certain words, certain sentences, certain vocabulary from wherever you are, and people appreciate that you're making an effort. That's when you assimilate part of the culture.
Yes.
Yes.
How about your worldview? How is it modified through all these experiences you've had?
With my experience, I think my life has become so enriched by learning and moving in different cultures. We have traveled extensively. We have been to Middle Eastern countries. You really begin to appreciate the people over there, why they behave the way they do. And my worldview has enlarged, I will say, opened up. It has brought lots in my worldview by absorbing different cultures.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've raised a family in a couple different places. How do you retain the cultural roots, or how do you? What was your idea around that?
Well, we gave them fundamentals of our own culture the way we were brought up. Honesty, integrity, discipline, hard work. They have to, but they have to become socially responsible citizens of the world. It's not only for themselves, they are to learn different cultures, and they are all engaged at this time where they can make a difference in the world, taking up humanitarian projects, traveling around the world and bridging the gap between one culture to another culture. So we raise them. We are not perfect. We have to learn to adapt, assimilate, and become socially responsible citizen of the world, not just one place.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank
these
you
things
for
with
sharing
us.
your experience. Most of us
Yes.
never, over the course of our lifetime, have the opportunity to have these enriching cultural experiences,
Yes.
but we can learn from others. If you'd like to know a little more about Dr. Cush, do visit the Tero website at tero.com, that's Tero.com, where you'll find her bio. She's a research consultant for us, so you'll also find several wonderful in-depth articles about a number of interpersonal skills topics. Thank you for joining us today. If you missed any portion of the program or you'd like to share it with others, you'll find the entire program loaded up to Tero's YouTube channel. Join us again next Monday morning at 9:03 Central Time, where we'll examine another tool in your Invisible Toolbox.
And now it's your turn. We welcome your ideas and suggestions for future shows. Email your ideas to ideas@yourinvisiblettoolbox.com and find us on your favorite social media platform. We're also on Instagram. And we would like you to subscribe to the Tero YouTube channel. You'll be alerted to when future shows and Tero Tips videos are going to air. A thank you today to Rachel Trainham, who is our producer and director, in lieu of Kyle, who is off in Las Vegas.
And he's off in Las Vegas, not gambling, well, I think, but he's off at a professional conference to improve his skills so that he can continue to help us serve our clients. Thank you again to Dr. Cush for joining us. Thanks to all of you, and that's a wrap.